Hello, this is the RPG Pundit, the final boss in Internet Shitlords. And I know I've been doing videos a little more frequently lately, but that's only because there's been news that's been consecutively coming out in cycles here where there hasn't been that big of a gap in time. But this is big news, and I have to mention it. You know, I kind of didn't feel like it. Today's really nice. It's like, really, you could tell this is now we're in full spring here, and the trees are greening up. And yesterday I went to the park, and in our park, it's the most fancy city park that there is, and it's very close to my house. There are, instead of pigeons in this park, there are parrots. And it's very cool because they act just like pigeons do, except they're green, and they like being in the park because, of course, the greenness gives them camouflage, right? So they pluck around on the grass looking for food and fly around, and people can like throw food at them or whatever, and they'll act just like a pigeon, but they're parrots. I think that's awesome, right? Anyways, I didn't have much of a desire to do this, but the news is really big, and the biggest thing was because I got this news probably before anyone did, or almost anyone. I heard it really early on. And at the time, there was the whole Planescape thing, and that seemed more interesting to me. And this, I was like, well, it's okay. I'm only going to do one video. I'll let it pass, right? But the reason I'm going to do this now is because I've seen some people do videos or post on Twitter about this or something, and they're getting something very vital wrong. There's a part that they're not understanding about this, okay? So this is the news. A few days ago, it was made public that Penguin/Bantam, I think it is, who are big, they're big time publishers, but they're also mass distributors of books, right? They had a deal with WotC to deliver, to be the guys that distribute D&D books to bookstores, whether it's like little tiny bookstores or like the big ones like Barnes and Noble or stuff like that, right? Like the huge box bookstores. And it was announced that they are no longer going to distribute D&D books. So this is basically, potentially, it's the end of having D&D printed books for sale in bookstores. Right now, it's not quite the end, because I'm going to mention something further down the video, but in essence, it kind of is, right? And then Wizards of the Coast did this post which said, we are no longer going to be working with Penguin. We're going to set up some other distributors, which is why I say it's not necessarily the end, but it's pretty bad, because I'm going to explain about that in a moment, right? So essentially, what most people were reporting was that Wizards of the Coast has decided to cut ties with Penguin, and that the reason they're doing this is that their only priority is going to be now to publish, to just do games on their VTT. And that sounds very reasonable, right? That sounds very credible because, we know they have stated very openly, right? Cynthia Williams openly stated what are their goals for D&D. Print is not one of their goals. Their goals are the virtual tabletop, movies, video games, and merchandising, right? They don't care about books. So for them to say, well, you know what, we're not even going to let people buy books anymore. If they want to play D&D, they'll have to go on the virtual tabletop. That does sound like a potentially, monumentally dumb, but a potentially credible plan coming from these people. Except, I'm quite sure that this interpretation is wrong. It's actually, in a way, kind of what Hasbro wants you to think, or what WotC wants you to think. Because, see, obviously, it's bad, looks really bad for a business. If you've got a deal with another business that's distributing your stuff, and that distributor cuts you off, right? Like that means you've got big problems, right? So what do you do, right? In that situation, assuming you can't solve the dispute or fix the problem, because maybe you really do have big problems, then the next best thing you can do is make it sound as though it was your choice, or like it was a mutual decision, okay? So you see where I'm going here, right? Penguin Bantam is gigantic, right? They have enormous amounts of publications. They're huge. Like, I mean, I'm pretty sure anyone who has any number of books at all is bound to have one with the little penguin logo on it, right? Like, it's that famous, right? And their production is really, really big. And they must have probably made a deal quite some time ago. I don't know exactly when. It must have been with Wizards of the Coast, or maybe like through Hasbro or whatever, but to be the distributors. And I'm sure that part of that agreement was like, it had with it certain presumptions, either literally built in to the contract or assumed by mutual agreement of both parties based on the projections of how successful D&D was, that there would be a certain amount of volume that would go through, right? Like, I'm pretty sure that Penguin was assuming that books that were published for D&D would be selling, I don't know, maybe at the time, depends how long ago they signed it, right? They might have been assuming that they would publish 50,000 to 100,000 books, right? That would be what they would be distributing. But the problem is, Wizards of the Coast went woke, right? Like, this would have been wonderful for Penguin back when 5e was initially published, and it became the most successful edition of D&D that WotC ever did, and arguably one of the top most successful ones ever. You're welcome. So they had no problem with that. And they were expecting that kind of thing to continue. Obviously, I'm sure that they could have assumed that non-core books would sell less than core books. They're not stupid. I'm sure they did all their homework, right? But then they know what a non-core book should be expected to sell. And the problem is that starting from around Candlekeep onwards, Wizards began to miss those marks, right? We now know there's been it's been published. Specifically, what was published is for book distribution. So we do not know, for example, exactly how many books Wizards has managed to sell on Amazon, right? I can tell you one thing. I just released Heroes and Villains of the Silk Road, and it is on the D&D list on Amazon. And as of yesterday, I believe it was like number 15 on the D&D list on Amazon. So that book, I can assure you, is not selling 100,000 copies. I mean, I would pee my pants with joy if it did, right? Like, I would just go crazy if it sold 100,000 copies, right? But I guarantee you it isn't, right? So if it gets to number 15 on the D&D list on Amazon, that means that the D&D list on Amazon is not doing well, right? So, that is a situation that shows you the vulnerability of it, right? But we don't have the exact numbers, but we did have a leak, basically, of the exact numbers that D&D was selling through this distribution to actual brick and mortar bookstores, okay? And the numbers were abysmal. So from like Candlekeep on to Ravenloft, what was it, the Magical College where you play baristas going to the prom. I always forget the name of that one. And so on and so forth, down to Radiant Citadel. They've been doing worse and worse and worse, and at a rate of decline that is accelerating. Okay, there have been a couple of little bumps. So like when Dragonlance came out, I think Dragonlance sold a little more, but it's because of name recognition, right? It's just because it had Dragonlance on the cover. So you could expect that maybe Planescape would sell or would have sold a little more because it said Planescape. Probably not as much as Dragonlance, which is much more known in the popular culture than Planescape, but it probably would have still gotten a little bit. It might have outdone Radiant Citadel, which was like so far at the bottom of the barrel. It sold 11,000 copies in big box bookstores, right? So that is pathetic, right? Like that is, at that point, there are amateurs that are producing stuff that, like, novels written by just some dude that is going to sell more than that, right? There's going to be tons of stuff that would sell more than that. So it is like horrific. I mean, there are Marvel comic books that still sell more than that. Like that's how bad it is, right? So it's just terrible. And I'm pretty sure that was probably the moment, as soon as Penguin saw where that was, that they said, you know what, screw this. We're done with them. Wizards clearly has driven that product line to the ground, and it's not profitable for us to even bother with this, right? So I'm pretty sure that's what happened. I'm pretty sure that Penguin made the decision. Now, is WotC crying itself to sleep at night every night because of this? Quite possibly not, because like I said, they don't care very much about the print books. They're looking to move everyone they can to the virtual tabletop. But the proof that they still do care is that they have gone on to go through the motions of saying that they're setting up their own distribution networks. But what they're basically doing, I looked at this, is that they've hired about, like, I forget, a half dozen or more in the US anyways, of these very minor distribution companies. Like the ones that are best known out of all those are Diamond, which are the guys that distribute comic books to comic book stores, right? And so this is going to be like really small fry compared to Penguin for sure. And Diamond has recently had like huge troubles of their own, so they're not doing too well either. But the thing is, with D&D books, you can't do what you do with comic books, right? Like in every publishing enterprise in the world, as far as conventional publishing is concerned, like we're not talking about print on demand, right? But in everything else, except comic books, you can send books to the big stores, and then the stores will hold them there. And if the books don't sell, then they are returned to the distributor and then returned to the publisher. So they can't, most bookstores are not obliged to keep the books and to try to keep selling them past a certain time. Like there's deals that they make, right? But generally speaking, books are returnable by the retailer back to the wholesaler. And so this is something that incurs costs, It makes the whole thing very difficult if you've suddenly got an operation that isn't doing well. I mean, that's one of the things that did TSR in. Now, it's not going to do Wizards in because Wizards is part of Hasbro, right? So that's a different story. But it's still, what it means is that it's something that's a really big hassle for a distributor, right? Especially, it depends on, like, if Wizards was trying to convince Penguin that they needed to distribute 200,000 copies of Radiant Citadel. I don't know. I'm not saying that they did, right? This is completely like speculative at this point, right? But if they like said something like that, and Penguin knew that this was not going to sell like that, right? But there was this insistence on it. Now they probably wouldn't have done that because they're, like somebody on the line in, well, I don't know. I want to imagine that someone on the line in Hasbro would stop them from doing something like that, right? Because it would just be stupid. It would end up costing Hasbro money, right? If you end up printing more books, like so that the number of books that you don't actually manage to sell are higher than the number you sell, you're literally losing. You're at a terrible loss there, right? So, I'd like to think that, but then again, the wokeness has clearly so infected them. Like, I mean, the fact that Radiant Citadel was ever put to print in the first place is incredible, right? Because it's just such a garbage book. It's so useless in every sense. And it was clear to almost anyone with the slightest modicum of intelligence who wasn't an ideological fanatic that book would do horribly. And yet, it still got printed, right? So I could imagine someone saying, no, you have to ship 200,000. If you ship 200,000, I guarantee you that all like Iranians and Venezuelans will buy this book because there's like one adventure that was like written about Venezuela where you can buy arepas or something, and there's like some adventure with like Iranian stuff in it that probably is offensive to most Iranian Muslims, so, like, I don't know, but they'll buy it. They'll buy it because it's diversity, right? And so maybe they would be convinced of something like that. The point is, if you get a screw up like that with Penguin, they'll drop you, right? If you get a screw up like that with like some of these smaller distributors, those distributors could die, right? So like there's no way that they can even handle that. So they'll probably have limits to how much they're going to be willing to ship, right? The only exception in any of this stuff is comic books, or for some reason, and this is why the comic book business was so toxic, comic books could force comic stores to take comics, including comics they knew were never going to sell, but they would say, if you want Superman #1, you're going to have to, like the new one that's coming out now, you're going to have to buy also at least 50 copies of Miss Marvel meets Tracy Abrams, right? Or Stacey Abrams, whatever her name is, like some horrible comic that nobody's ever going to buy, right? So they're literally forcing the comic book store to take a loss to get the comic that they know people are going to come to buy. And then also they can't return. There are no returns in comics, right? So if you're sometimes forced to take a stock of a product you will never be able to sell, that you're never going to be able to get out of your inventory, that you've paid for, but you're never going to see any profit for ever, right? So it's just horrific. But with books, it's not like that. And so with books, this is where it gets tricky for Wizards of the Coast. But they clearly still want to have some kind of presence, or else they wouldn't even have bothered to do this. Or maybe, okay, I can grant one other possibility, is that they really don't want to have a presence, but they have to do this because some higher-ups at Hasbro think it's still necessary. But this is their way of doing it without actually being able to do it. Like, your boss tells you, okay, you got to get this done. You got to get this whole project done and get it, working and something. And you're like, oh yeah, okay. So you go and you start getting it to work. You get it into a kind of order, but it's not actually going to work. But that doesn't matter because the boss just wants to. He's not going to want to know the details of it ever, right? So you're just telling him, yeah, it's there. It's all set up. We can distribute whenever you want. And he'll be like, oh, all right then. Well, that's okay. That might be a scenario that is going on here. In any case, it's really evident that Wizards is not going to be focusing on printed books. That is still true. But it's also bears noting, because none of these problems necessarily go away with the BTT automatically. I think there's a good chance that there's a possibility for Wizards to do an entire reset there. And if they're clever enough and ruthless enough, they could do that. And that would be their best chance of what is basically a bad plan. Right, like the bad plan is to go full virtual tabletop, especially now you're going to be competing with like Baldur's Gate and stuff. But they're going to do that. But if they do like a virtual woke tabletop, if the tabletop tries to do shit like Radiant Citadel, it's just going to be a complete disaster, right? Like it's going to be an unprecedented disaster. But they have a chance by saying, the virtual tabletop's different. We got to have dungeons. We can't really do like there isn't a repa eating contest. We can't really have prom night in the dungeon, right? So the virtual tabletop is going to have to be a little bit more traditional, you guys. And you know what? We don't really need all of Ajit George's, key party buddies, that he's brought in. All these people have never played D&D, but have written like vegan cookbooks and have, blogs about lesbian polyamory or whatever, and are people that have done young adult novels that are being currently that they're trying to currently force into public schools as like worst case scenarios of what they want to do to groom people, stuff like that, right? Like those people that have all been brought in as the diversity hires of Wizards that are all absolutely useless and they are all absolutely talented and they have no skill in game design. Sorry, virtual tabletop is the thing you were doing before it's closed. We're not really doing it anymore. Goodbye, and then they might be able to. If Wizards was really, really smart, they wouldn't even try to hire at least not more than one or two actual designers. And what they would do is find a way to basically hopefully buy out, though more realistically, they'll probably try to find a way to rip off the more talented homebrew game designers that start showing up on the BTT, right? Take their stuff and monetize it, right? And give them a pittance and keep most of it. But, maybe the pittance will be enough for a lot of people, right? Pittance could be pretty cool for you if you were expecting to make $0 off of the super dungeon you did in the BTT, right? But that might actually be a success, right? But it's only going to ever be a success. The only chance it has is if they de-woke this, because otherwise the numbers are going to be the same except instant and more brutal, right? Like people go in there and the first thing that they're going to see is like the big thing you're highlighting, at the grand opening of the virtual tabletop is like the non-binary furry prom, and everybody's expected to attend. And if you don't, you'll be suspected of white supremacy and you'll probably get banned from the server, right? Like that's it. You're done. That's instant, right? Like at least with books, it takes a few months to find out just how badly you completely screwed up, But with this, it'll be like super fast. So, I hope that at the very least that they'll think about, well, I mean, I don't know. I'm a bit divided. I don't know what all of you think, but like half of me would really love to see the entire woke crowd of the current writers that have just ran 5th edition into the ground with these adventures that are increasingly idiotic and increasingly horrible. I'd love to see all of them get, basically Elon Musk, but by WotC of all things, right? By Kyle Brink, right? Kyle Brink would be like, yeah, I know, I'm still the white man, I'm still here, but all of you guys, you're fired. That would be hilarious. It would be. But on the other hand, I almost also kind of think it would be just as great to see them like all be brought in, and they're all now trying to do virtual adventures on this. Like people who've never played D&D and who clearly can't handle having a real job in any way, which is why they're writing vegan cookbooks, and they don't, they don't actually know anything about D&D or anything in their lives except their like petty, childless millennial hobbies. Trying to make virtual adventures now where you have to have like, you're going to have combat scenarios. You're going to have to program shit. Maybe they'll get them a programmer, right? Because none of them ever think they'll have to learn to code, right? And then, watch them do something unbelievably woke and then watch the whole VTT go up in flames because of that, and then it won't only hurt them, it'll hurt the executives in WotC, right? So do I want like the immediate satisfaction of firing the woke diversity hires, or do I want the greater satisfaction of seeing all of the current Wizards executives getting, basically skewered over this, It's hard to know. It's hard to say. But the point is, this is not like I'm so certain. I don't have definite proof, but I'm like, it's one of those things that it has to be the case. This is not Wizards saying we don't need you anymore, Penguin. No, this is Penguin saying you guys aren't worth our time anymore. That's how badly you've ruined your own product. That's what this is. Okay. So I guess that's everything for today. Don't get WotC books. That's one of the big lessons from here. Instead, check out the OSR, right? The OSR is what D&D is really about today. And you can certainly check out my products, right? Stuff like Lion and Dragon, which is a platinum bestseller on drive-thru. And so is its first setting, Dark Albion. And its second setting, Sword and Caravan, is already a gold bestseller. And these are like incredible settings and rule books. And if you don't like gritty, Game of Thrones-esque medieval fantasy that is like based very much in actual medieval culture, well, check out my Gonzo line, like World of the Last Sun and the Gonzo Fantasy Companion. Even if you're not in the book for a setting, the Gonzo Fantasy Companion is a source book full of rules and generators and special, collections of objects and creature generators and all kinds of stuff that you can use to add a touch of, Adventure Time-esque weirdness or, Rick and Morty-esque weirdness or something like that, to your fantasy game. So be sure to check it out. The Gonzo Fantasy Companion is full of incredible stuff. All the links to these and any of my other books are in the description below, where you just click on the little more thing and it'll expand the description of the video, and there'll be links to everything there, including my new book, Heroes and Villains of the Silk Road. So be sure to check all those out. Oh, hey, there goes Meatball. Okay, I was about to point to her, but she just went right through. She's heading straight for her food. So I guess that's all you see of her today. That's everything for today. Currently smoking. This is a Neerup Poker plus Argento Roots.